I never thought peace could look so expensive. When the headlines flashed, "Will Smith files for divorce, $100 million settlement," the world gasped. But behind the flashbulbs and the perfect smiles, something much quieter had been dying long before the papers were signed. It didn't happen overnight. It began in the silences, the kind that hide behind laughter and small talk. The kind that follows you to bed and lingers in the morning when neither of you speaks first. I used to think silence meant safety. Now I know it meant the end was already beginning. I believed in forever once. I believed that if you gave enough, loved enough, stayed long enough, love would stay too. But in this world, this shining world where everyone's watching, love doesn't fade, it performs. And when the performance ends, all that's left is truth. That night I sat alone in the living room. The air felt heavy, almost rehearsed, like it had waited for this silence too. Her perfume was still there, floating somewhere between memory and regret. I stared at our wedding photo on the wall, two people smiling, trying to convince themselves that forever could be built on forgiveness alone. People keep asking, how could he lose $100 million? But what they don't understand is that money was never the loss. The real loss was waking up and realizing I'd been holding on to something that stopped holding me back. There's a moment in every heartbreak when time slows down, not because you're remembering, but because your heart refuses to accept the ending it already knows is coming. For me, it was the morning she walked past me without a word. No fight, no tears. Just quiet distance that said more than anything she could have spoken. They called it the shortest Hollywood marriage. But for me, it was the longest lesson. Sometimes it's not the betrayal that breaks you. It's the pretending, the smiling through the hurt, the acting like love is still there when it's already gone. I watched the lights of the media trucks outside my house and whispered to myself, peace isn't free. Sometimes it costs everything you thought you couldn't live without. The world saw a scandal. I saw an ending that had been playing on repeat long before the cameras arrived. And that's where this story really begins. Not in the courtroom, not in the headlines, but in the space between love and loneliness, where a man who had everything finally learned what it means to lose himself. Before the storm, life felt almost simple. I used to wake up every morning to sunlight spilling through the curtains, the sound of her humming in the kitchen, the smell of coffee filling the house. For a while, that was enough. Fame, money, the endless noise of the outside world. It all faded when I walked through that door. Inside, I was just a man. Not a star, not a story. Just a man who wanted to be loved quietly. She used to say, "You're always on stage, even at home." I'd laugh it off, not realizing how right she was. Because even in love, I was performing, trying to be the man the world expected, not the one she needed. There were moments that felt real, though. Early morning drives to nowhere. Grocery store runs in hoodies and sunglasses. Nights when we'd sit on the balcony, not talking about anything, just breathing the same air. Those were the pieces of life that made everything else feel worth it. I remember one night we sat watching the city lights. She leaned on my shoulder and said, "Promise me you won't forget who you are." I said I wouldn't. But somewhere between premieres, interviews, and everyone else's opinions, I did. The truth is, fame makes love heavier. Every word becomes a headline, every silence a rumor. And no matter how much you try to keep it private, someone always finds a way to turn your pain into a story. At first, we tried to fight it. We laughed off the gossip, ignored the noise. We told ourselves we were stronger than the spotlight. But cracks don't start as explosions. They start as whispers, small doubts, tiny hurts that pile up until you can't see the good anymore. There were nights I'd come home late, exhausted from the chaos of a world that never stops asking for more. She'd be sitting on the couch, phone in her hand, eyes red but pretending not to have cried. "You missed dinner again," she'd say softly. And I'd reply, "You know how it is." That phrase, "you know how it is," became the wall between us. I used it to explain everything, to avoid everything, to escape everything. But she did know how it was. She knew the pressure, the scrutiny, the loneliness that hides inside fame. She just wanted me to see that she was still there, waiting for me to stop performing long enough to really be with her. One evening, we hosted a small dinner at home. A few friends, some laughter, music playing low. For a moment, it felt like old times. Until someone mentioned a rumor, something about a photo, a message, a story that wasn't true. I saw the shift in her eyes. The joy left the room before the guests did. After they left, she asked me quietly, "Was any of it true?" I said no. She nodded, but her eyes didn't believe me. And I realized, trust doesn't break when you lie. It breaks when you sound rehearsed telling the truth. Days turned into weeks of walking around each other like strangers. We smiled for cameras, held hands in public, said the right words, but the warmth was gone. And every night I could feel it slipping further away. One night she said something that stayed with me. "You've built a life where everyone sees you, but no one knows you." I didn't answer. I couldn't, because she was right. I thought love could survive distance. But emotional distance, when you're lying in the same bed and still feel miles apart, that's the kind that breaks quietly, piece by piece. Looking back now, I realize those days were the last days of peace. The calm before the collapse, the slow fade before the silence. And somewhere deep down, I think we both knew the storm was already on its way. It didn't happen all at once. The end never does. It starts in small ways, missed calls, unread texts, conversations that circle the same arguments until both people forget what they were even fighting for. At first I thought it was just exhaustion. We both had so much happening, projects, appearances, family, endless schedules. I told myself we were fine, just tired. But tired turns into distant, and distant turns into cold. She stopped asking where I was going, and I stopped offering explanations. That silence, the kind that feels polite but sharp, became the soundtrack of our home. We were still together technically, but it felt like living beside a ghost. I could hear her in the next room, but I couldn't reach her anymore. I'd catch glimpses of her scrolling through headlines, her thumb pausing over stories that twisted our lives into entertainment. Sometimes she'd laugh under her breath, like she was mocking how easily people believed lies. Other times she'd just go quiet, and that silence said more than any accusation ever could. We'd go out in public, smiling, posing, holding hands. But when the cameras were gone, we'd drift apart like magnets flipped the wrong way. One night, after a long shoot, I came home past midnight. The house lights were dim, the kind of glow that hides rather than welcomes. She was sitting by the window, arms folded, still in the same clothes from earlier. I knew that look. It wasn't anger. It was something worse. Disappointment. "Were you even going to call?" she asked. I sighed. "I didn't want to wake you." Her voice trembled just a little. "You don't wake me anymore, Will. You just disappear." I wanted to say something, anything to fix it. But the truth is, I didn't know how to talk anymore. I knew how to perform, how to charm, how to make millions of people feel seen. But her, the one person I needed to reach, I'd forgotten how. Days passed, and the tension turned into routine. We were two professionals rehearsing the same scene, love on cue, peace for the cameras, indifference in private. Then came the night everything shifted. We were at an event, one of those perfectly orchestrated red carpet illusions. Cameras flashing, questions flying, laughter that didn't belong to us. When she turned to smile at me, her hand brushed mine and I felt it. Not affection, not connection, just duty. I looked at her, and for the first time, I saw a stranger wearing someone I used to know. Later that night, back at home, she asked me quietly, "Do you even know what you want anymore?" I said, "I want this to work." She shook her head. "No, you want it to look like it's working." That sentence hit harder than any argument. From that moment, the walls between us became real. She moved into the guest room for a few nights, but we both knew what it meant. Her laughter faded from the mornings, her perfume from the hallways. I started staying out later, telling myself it was work. Maybe it was, or maybe it was just escape. I'd sit in my car outside the house, engine running, staring at the front door, wondering when love had started feeling like walking into a storm. Every time I thought of talking to her, something stopped me. Pride, fear, ego, maybe all three. I told myself she'd come around, that she'd understand. But deep down, I think I knew she already had. She'd understood something I hadn't yet accepted. That love can't survive when truth is missing. One evening, I found her packing a small suitcase. My heart dropped. "You're leaving." She looked at me calm and sad. "No, I'm reminding myself that I can." That's when the panic set in. The kind of panic that doesn't shout. It whispers. It tells you that the thing you thought you controlled is already gone. I followed her into the hallway, trying to stop her, trying to say something that would change everything. But my voice cracked, and all that came out was, "I still love you." She stopped for a moment, back turned to me, then said softly, "Love isn't enough when it keeps hurting." And she walked away. That night, I realized something I'd never said out loud before. Sometimes, the hardest thing about love isn't losing it. It's admitting that you've been pretending it's still there. I watched her car drive away, headlights vanishing into the dark, and in that silence that followed, I knew this wasn't just a fight. This was the beginning of the end. The days after she left were unbearable in a way I hadn't imagined. The house, once full of warmth and laughter, felt like a hollow shell. Every corner, every photograph, every small memento reminded me of promises I had failed to keep. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, pretending I belonged. While everything I loved seemed to retreat further into silence, I remember opening the closet and seeing her clothes, folded neatly as if she'd planned to come back any moment. The scent lingered faintly, a cruel reminder that she was already gone. I sat on the floor staring at the jacket I used to hold in my arms when she laughed, and realized how much space someone can leave in your life, even when they're no longer there physically. I reached for my phone, hoping for a message, a call, anything that would tell me she was still there. But it was silent. No notifications, nothing, just the echo of absence. And then came the public revelation. The papers, the stories, the whispers. Will Smith's shortest marriage, yet $100 million settlement. My life had always been open to the world, but nothing could have prepared me for this. Every headline was a knife, each social media comment another cut. People didn't see the man behind the star, the human behind the fame. They saw a figure, a story, a scandal. I tried to keep moving, tried to focus on work, on family, on anything that would drown out the pain. But it followed me everywhere. I'd wake in the middle of the night, heart pounding, only to remember the truth all over again. She had chosen to leave. She had chosen a life without me, and I had done nothing to stop it. I replayed our last conversation in my mind 1,000 times. Her words weren't angry, they weren't harsh. They were simple, almost gentle. Love isn't enough when it keeps hurting. I had believed love was enough. I had believed that if I worked harder, showed up more, if I performed better, she would stay. But love isn't a performance. Love is raw, unfiltered, honest, and I had failed to see it when it mattered most. The grief wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, relentless, like water slowly carving stone. I found myself staring at the walls, listening to the hum of electricity, thinking about what I had lost, not just her, but the version of myself I had been when I thought I could make it all work. Friends called, family reached out, but I couldn't explain it. How do you put words to the emptiness of someone leaving? How do you translate the ache that comes from realizing that no matter what you say, no matter what you do, some things can't be fixed? I began walking at night, roaming streets I had once loved, trying to find solace in movement. But even the city lights couldn't chase away the shadow she had left. Every smile I saw on strangers reminded me of the smiles we once shared. Every laugh, every gesture, every mundane detail felt like a mirror reflecting what I had lost. And then came the financial revelation, $100 million. The number was almost meaningless compared to the magnitude of the emotional collapse it represented. It wasn't just money, it was everything. The life we had imagined together, the shared dreams, the whispered plans, the comfort of knowing someone would always be there. It all had a price tag now. A cold, exact number that could never replace what was gone. I sat alone for hours, thinking of how differently things could have been. Small gestures I had ignored, moments I had taken for granted, words left unsaid. I tortured myself imagining conversations I should have had, apologies I should have given, love I should have shown. And in that quiet, I finally allowed myself to feel it fully. The betrayal wasn't dramatic. It wasn't violent. It was the simple truth that sometimes love ends quietly, and sometimes no amount of money, fame, or apology can bring it back. I cried, not like a man breaking, but like someone who had lost the map to his own heart. And in that grief, I began to understand something profound. The deepest wound isn't the leaving itself, it's realizing that, in trying to hold on, you've lost yourself. Every day became a lesson in absence. Every night a meditation on regret. I learned how fragile trust is, how fleeting happiness can be, and how heavy silence becomes when it fills the spaces where love used to live. By the time the first month had passed, I felt hollowed out. Not just by her departure, not just by the public spectacle of our separation, but by the intimate understanding that I had been a witness to my own unraveling and had allowed it to happen. The wound was deep, and it would take everything I had to find a way back. Not to her, not to what we had, but to myself. The days after the deepest wound felt endless, but slowly something began to shift. Not suddenly, not with fanfare or a dramatic revelation, just a quiet, almost imperceptible change in the way I felt when I woke up. The weight of loss was still there. Yes, but now, beneath it, there was a sliver of clarity. I started noticing things I had ignored before. The way the sunlight hit the living room floor, the way the city sounded when it rained, the small, ordinary rhythms of life that went on whether I was in despair or not. And for the first time since she left, I realized that I didn't have to perform anymore. Not for her, not for the world, not even for myself. One night, I sat alone in the quiet of my living room, staring at the same wedding photo that had haunted me. The room smelled faintly of old coffee and dust, and I let myself breathe. Deep, deliberate breaths. And then it hit me, the truth I had been avoiding. I had spent so long trying to hold on to an illusion that I had forgotten the one thing I could control: myself. It wasn't about winning her back or rewriting the past, or even proving to anyone that I was right. It was about understanding that life doesn't stop because someone leaves, and love doesn't end because it changes. The moral, the breaking point, was realizing that I could no longer define my worth by someone else's presence or absence. The turning point came quietly in the simplest of moments. A phone call from a friend, a laugh at a silly joke, a text that said nothing more than, "Thinking of you." And I realized that life was still moving, still breathing, still offering small pieces of hope. I had spent so long looking backward that I had forgotten to notice what was right in front of me. I began to reflect deeply on the choices I had made. How often had I let ego dictate my actions? How many times had I prioritized appearances over truth? Every misstep, every avoided conversation, every silence that had built the walls between us. Suddenly, I saw it all with brutal honesty. And instead of anger, instead of despair, there was understanding. I understood that love isn't about possession. It isn't about control. It isn't about holding someone so tightly that they can't breathe. Love is about presence, about connection, about sharing life with someone while letting them remain free. And in that moment, I realized that part of our marriage had failed not because we didn't love each other, but because I had tried to own what could never be owned. For the first time in weeks, I laughed at myself. Not bitterly, not with sarcasm, but a soft, reflective laugh that carried the relief of a man beginning to wake up from a long, painful dream. I thought of all the things I had lost, all the words I had left unsaid, all the moments I had failed to recognize. And yet, paradoxically, I felt lighter. The truth revealed itself gradually, like dawn breaking over a dark horizon. I began writing letters, not to her, not to anyone else, just to myself. Letters that admitted fear, weakness, failure, but also gratitude for the love I had experienced. I acknowledged the pain, but I refused to let it define me. And then came a moment I will never forget. Standing in the empty kitchen, coffee in hand, listening to the rain tap against the window, I whispered to no one in particular. I survived. I can survive this. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't victory. It was acceptance. And it changed everything, because in that quiet turning point, I realized that life was no longer about trying to fix what was broken. It was about learning, understanding, and moving forward with intention. About seeing the truth clearly, feeling it fully, and letting it guide me. I was no longer trapped in the grief of losing her. I was stepping into the clarity of knowing myself. And for the first time since it all began, I felt the faint stirrings of hope, not for love. After the turning point, the quiet moments became my teacher. Every day I would sit in the stillness of the morning, coffee in hand, letting the memories wash over me, letting them settle like sediment at the bottom of a glass. The grief was still there, but it no longer consumed me entirely. I was beginning to see clearly, beginning to understand the layers of what had happened, and more importantly, the layers of who I had become in the process. I realized that part of the pain had always been about me, not about her, not about the divorce, not about the money, but about the man I had allowed myself to become. I had built walls, not just around her, but around myself. I had hidden behind humor, behind charm, behind the endless expectations of the world. And in doing so, I had lost touch with the simplest, most essential parts of me, the parts that could feel deeply, care openly, and be truly vulnerable. I began to see the patterns. The silences that once felt safe now looked like the cracks in a dam. The words left unsaid, the apologies delayed, the distractions chosen over connection. They were not mistakes isolated in time. They were a series of choices that had slowly unraveled the bond we had shared. And that knowledge was bitter, but it was also freeing. Understanding where I had faltered gave me a way to start rebuilding. I thought about the moments I had taken for granted. The mornings we had spent laughing over breakfast, the quiet evenings on the balcony, the simple handholds that had meant everything in their simplicity. I realized that love had never really left us. It had just been buried beneath fear, pride, and unspoken expectations. The problem was not the love itself. It was my inability to nurture it in the way it needed to grow. Reflection became a ritual. I would lie awake at night and replay conversations, noticing not just her words, but my responses, or the lack thereof. I saw how often I had chosen convenience over courage, comfort over honesty, performance over presence. Each realization stung, but it also brought clarity. I began to forgive myself, not for the mistakes, but for not understanding them sooner. I began to understand that self-awareness was the first step toward change, and that without it, any relationship, no matter how passionate or promising, was doomed to falter. I also began to understand her perspective in ways I hadn't before. The distance, the frustrations, the moments of doubt, they weren't betrayals. They were signals, cries for connection that I had failed to recognize. The blame I once placed outwardly slowly shifted inward, not in a destructive way, but as a deep, reflective acknowledgement of my own responsibility. And in that acknowledgement, I discovered something profound, that healing begins not when others change, but when we do, not when circumstances align, but when we stop resisting the truth. I began to feel compassion not only for her, but for myself, for the flawed, complicated man I had been. I started small. I journaled. I spoke my thoughts aloud when no one was listening. I practiced being present in every fleeting moment. I noticed the world differently. The way the sunlight cut across, the walls in the morning, the sound of distant laughter echoing through the streets, the way strangers smiled without expectation. I felt a quiet gratitude for life itself, even with its heartbreak, even with its impermanence. In the depth of this reflection, I realized that the divorce, the money, the headlines, they were all distractions from a larger lesson. The real story was the journey inward. The divorce was not the end. It was a mirror showing me who I had been and who I could become. And for the first time in a long while, I felt the stirrings of genuine peace, not the superficial peace of appearances, but the kind that comes from understanding, accepting, and growing. I began to see the beauty in imperfection, in failure, in the messy, unpolished nature of life. I began to understand that love is not just an act between two people, but a reflection of the self we choose to cultivate. That in losing her in one form, I had found a deeper connection with myself. And in that realization, I finally allowed myself to hope, not for what was lost, not for what could have been, but for the life still ahead. A life where mistakes could be lessons, where grief could coexist with growth, and where love, in all its forms, could finally be understood. I sat in that quiet room, letting the understanding sink in, and whispered to myself, I see now, I understand now, and I am ready to live, fully and honestly, no matter what comes next. The healing didn't happen overnight. It never does. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to feel life returning to me, not in the dramatic way the movies portray, but quietly, in small gestures, subtle realizations, and fleeting moments of peace. I started with myself. I stopped trying to control what I could not and focused on what I could. My thoughts, my actions, my presence. I gave myself permission to feel the grief without being consumed by it, to acknowledge my mistakes without being defined by them, and to love without needing someone else to return it immediately. I found comfort in the little things. The smell of fresh coffee in the morning, the soft warmth of sunlight across my skin, the rhythm of walking down empty streets at night, letting the world pass by unnoticed. These were the moments that reminded me life was still here, still unfolding, still worth engaging with. I reconnected with friends and family in ways I had neglected. Conversations became honest. Laughter became lighter, and slowly, I discovered that support didn't need to be performative. It could be quiet, genuine, and restorative. I realized that surrounding myself with people who saw me, without expectation or judgment, was a kind of healing in itself. I also learned to forgive. Not just her, not just the circumstances, but myself. I forgave myself for the pride that kept me from speaking, for the fear that kept me from acting, for the ego that convinced me that appearances mattered more than truth. And in forgiving, I found a lightness I hadn't felt in months. The days that once felt heavy with absence began to carry moments of joy. I laughed again, truly laughed. Not for the cameras, not for anyone else, but because something inside me was remembering how to feel fully. I began to see opportunities instead of obstacles, possibilities instead of regrets. The world, which had once felt like a cage, started to feel like a place of freedom and discovery. In my solitude, I started dreaming again. Not grandiose dreams for the world to applaud, but personal ones. Dreams about growth, about purpose, about becoming a man I could respect. I reflected on the lessons of the marriage and the divorce, understanding that every loss, every heartbreak, every failure carries with it a seed of transformation, if you are willing to nurture it. And then, in that quiet, reflective state, I understood the true meaning of resolution. It wasn't about reclaiming what was lost. It wasn't about repairing the past. It was about accepting what had happened, learning from it, and allowing myself to step into the next chapter fully and honestly. I began to live with intention. I spoke my truth, acted with integrity, and sought connection with people who aligned with the person I was becoming. The grief still visited sometimes, but it no longer controlled me. Instead, it reminded me of what I had endured and what I had survived. Love returned too, though differently. Not the frantic, consuming love I had once believed in, but a quieter, more grounded understanding. Love is empathy, as compassion, as the willingness to give freely without demanding reciprocation. I discovered that I could experience this love even in solitude, even in reflection, and that it had nothing to do with another person's presence. I also began to see her, not with bitterness, not with longing, but with gratitude. Gratitude for what we had shared, for the lessons she had inadvertently taught me, for the clarity that came from the end. In letting go of resentment, I freed myself from the weight of the past, and gradually life began to feel lighter. Each morning became a chance to start anew. Each conversation an opportunity to connect more deeply. Each day a gift rather than a reminder of loss. I started planning, dreaming, and moving forward, grounded in the understanding that healing is not a destination. It's a practice, a continuous choice to embrace life despite pain. In that resolution, I found a sense of peace I had never known in the chaos of fame, in the illusions of perfection, or in the desperation of trying to hold on to something slipping through my hands. I realized that real strength comes not from winning or keeping, but from accepting, growing, and allowing life to unfold as it must. I whispered to myself one evening, watching the city lights twinkle through my window, I am here. I am whole. I am learning to live again. And for the first time in months, I felt ready, not just to survive, but to truly live. The months that followed were quieter, gentler, filled with reflection and subtle growth. I no longer chased validation from the world or performed for the cameras. I began to notice the small moments of beauty I had once overlooked. The way sunlight filtered through the leaves, the sound of laughter shared without expectation, the feeling of genuine connection when someone listened without judgment. I started to understand that life is composed of these fleeting instants, and that happiness, peace, and love are not always found in grand gestures, but in the quiet awareness of living fully in the present. Each morning became an opportunity. Each evening, a chance to release the weight of what I could not change. I thought often of her, not with longing, not with bitterness, but with clarity. She had been a mirror, reflecting my flaws and strengths alike. And in accepting what had passed, I finally allowed myself to appreciate the lessons hidden in the heartbreak. Every mistake, every silence, every moment of failure had brought me here, to this understanding, to this calm. I forgave the past, not for anyone else, not because it was required, but because I owed it to myself. Forgiveness was no longer about reconciliation, it was about freedom. Freeing my heart from the burdens of anger, regret, and resentment. Freeing my mind from replaying moments that could never be changed. And in that freedom, I discovered hope. Not the naive hope of wanting someone back or undoing what had happened, but the quiet hope of new beginnings. Hope in myself, in the world, and in the possibility that life could still surprise me in ways I had never imagined. I returned to my passions with a renewed sense of purpose, working not to impress or perform, but to create, to inspire, to live authentically. Relationships became deeper, richer, more meaningful. I learned to value sincerity over spectacle, honesty over appearances, connection over convenience. Evenings became my sanctuary. I would sit in quiet reflection, thinking about the journey, the mistakes, the heartbreak, the lessons, and the growth. And I understood something essential. Endings are not always the loss we fear. Sometimes they are the beginnings we have been waiting for. I smiled quietly one night alone in my home, finally at peace. I had survived the storm, learned from the grief, and embraced the lessons it brought. The love I once thought had ended had transformed, becoming wisdom, resilience, and self-understanding. Life no longer felt like a performance. It felt like presence, like awareness, like the slow, steady rhythm of a heart learning to beat freely again. And in that calm, I realized that peace isn't something given, it's something earned. Through courage, reflection, and the willingness to face the truth, no matter how painful. Sometimes walking away isn't losing. Sometimes it's choosing yourself, choosing to honor your heart, your growth, and your life. I had chosen that finally. And in doing so, I discovered a serenity that no loss, no heartbreak, and no headline could ever take away. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, I hope you take a moment to reflect on your own journey. Life is full of twists we cannot control, losses we cannot prevent, and moments of heartbreak that feel unbearable. But within every ending lies the seed of growth, and within every grief, the chance to find ourselves again. The lessons are always there, waiting quietly for us to notice that love is not possession, that forgiveness is freedom, and that the most important connection we can nurture is the one with ourselves. No headline, no scandal, and no fortune can replace the understanding, the resilience, and the clarity we gain when we face life honestly and fully. I hope this story reminds you that even when life feels broken, even when the world seems unfair, there is always a way forward. Healing is possible, peace is possible, and in time, hope will return. Your support helps keep these stories alive, sharing the journeys of people who, like us all, are learning, failing, growing, and discovering what it truly means to live. Please subscribe to Talksberry and share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice makes these stories meaningful. And always remember, this story is dramatized for inspiration purposes only.